If you have followed along, anything that I will say about fisheye would be maybe a repetition, except for what is only real for the fisheye, of course, and that we need to find the nodal point, which is normally here that golden ring. And when I say normally, there are discussions on the web that this ring is only good for one option and not for all. I will go into that in a second. We need, of course, something that gives me here a degree, and we have to have everything pretty much horizontally. But as I've shown, it's not so important. It's only important that we find the nodal point and then have the camera really like on one flat plane rotated around, revolved around, so to say. And what we need to know from a fisheye is it should be in fisheye that fits to your camera. That sounds maybe a little bit weird, but there are different fisheyes available for different sensor sizes. Full frame normally is fine with 8 millimeters. When you have a smaller sensor, perhaps you need 4.5 millimeter or something between. Normally we can say it has 180 degree view angle. There are fisheyes available with 180 and 5, and I'm aware also about one special series, and I say series because the numbers of lenses is limited to 220, if I recall it right, and the angle of view of that lens is also 220. Sounds maybe awesome, and immediately the trigger is to buy it, but keep in mind, the wider the lens is, the less resolution your final panorama has. With 220 degree, the idea is of course very close to say, oh, I need only to shoot in two opposite directions, and then I can have already my full panorama. And exactly that's true, but on the edges you have the smallest resolution for everything. In the middle it's a little bit better, and so some people argue to shoot maybe 4 images, like in tetraeder, 1 up and 3 down, or in a different configuration, which is maybe doable when you have 4 cameras and you leave the angle of view or the direction of the camera always in the same way. To have that with something mobile here, with a tripod, not really easily to do. With a panoramic head, perhaps. But anyway, 180 degree means there's always something in the picture. Maybe here this little screw, your feet, your shadow, the tripod, there's always something to fix from that. And you should always shoot at least one time down just to get it without any tripod, which is of course always a little bit tricky to get exactly the nodal point and freehand. And my best resolution is, so far, I shoot 3 images, or 3 direction, always 120 degrees from each other in distance. I have tried also 4 and more, but 3 is really something where I get, from my point of view, the best results in the shortest time, because time is always critical. And when you want to shoot maybe 9 exposures and you have 3 directions, you end up with 27 pictures instead of many more. And Pidigui is pretty simple to get around with these 3 shots only. It's very nice. And what I wanted to tell you here is, of course, when you have this golden ring here, there is one area where we want to have an overlapping, where the panos or the images finally overlap to each other, and where the stitching algorithm has to find a seam along this. And exactly that means we take only 120 degrees and not 180 degrees horizontally from it. And there is, of course, the need that we need to have the nodal point exactly right. So you have to test, when you go back to the nodal point or a non-parallax discussion, rotate the camera 60 degrees to one area, to the left, for example, find something that lines up in front of the lens, and then go 120 degrees to the other direction, and then it should line up as well. And then you have found exactly for these 120 degrees your nodal point. Perhaps your fisheye is fine all over the place and you only need here this golden ring from the Sigma lens here, for example. It's not always that simple. It moves. And the more images you take, the less you need from that lens, and maybe the parallax point, the nodal point of that lens is different. You need to make your own tests, of course. And one more tip, and I have said that before, if you have to look directly into the sun, and that is most likely with fish eyes, then look straight into it. Have this area here directly pointing to it, so the lens flare is minimized. If it comes from one side and then in the next shot from another side, it creates much more lens flare. Just a little hint. And of course, play with it, use it, and be aware that some people call a fisheye already when it is 15 millimeters in focal length. And that is then not the circular picture that you get finally out. We will see this when we stitch the images together. And there's also sometimes a rectangular fisheye where everything is a little bit overcorrected to stitch finally a 360 by 180. It's a longer story, but test this out. Find something that gives you a circular picture when you want to do this. And with this camera here, and I left the name this time up, this has now nearly 21 megapixels. And when I stitch an image, I get pretty much 7,000 pixels in the panorama horizontally with 3 shots. And of course, when I do 4 shots or 5 shots, I get exactly the same, but it's maybe more precise. There's one method, and I have tried it and I was not really satisfied. It's an application that takes exactly 7 or 9 or more images with the same exposure on top of each other, takes the average out, and tell you that the resolution can be done twice because the precision of each pixel is higher. I'm not really certain if it is twice, but that's the only way to expand your camera and the lens. I think it was photo acute. You figured it out. I wouldn't use it. I take the original pixels and I'm fine with it. Thanks for listening. See you in the next part.